You're listening to Inside Content, the TV industry podcast. This show is brought to you by 3Vision, a global TV industry consultancy specializing in content acquisition, strategy, research, and business development. Each episode, we give you VIP access to the views and experiences of senior TV executives and discuss the latest TV industry trends and insights.
This week on Inside Content, we take a look at our new 2023 TV industry trends and predictions report with our EVP, Jack Davison, and Director, Jack Thomas, to discuss topics such as AVOD growth, SVOD competition, free TV innovation, the evolution of Pay TV, and of course, the unrelenting demand for content. Hello and welcome to a special episode of Inside Content. I'm Peyton Lombardo, a manager at 3Vision, and today we'll be discussing our much anticipated new report, the 2023 TV Industry Trends and Predictions. This is an annual survey that we do every year with our extensive network of TV executives in order to figure out the industry predictions for the year ahead. If you'd like to download the full report, the link will be in the description, or if you want to access it via our website, you can head to www.3vision.tv/news-insights. Jack Davison, Jack Thomas, it's really good to see you guys. Hope you're both well.
Good, thank you. Very good. It's good to be here with you, Peyton, and the other Jack. You got Jack Davison here. I love talking about the trend survey. It's always, I almost consider it a luxury to take some time out. It's like when we do our podcasts and talk to our friends. But it's a luxury just to look at respondents' views this year. Obviously, 2022 was it's probably pretty important to highlight the context that I think we're all aware of, but it was a crazy year. The reality was that the world economy didn't quite explode, but it experienced and continues to experience challenges, tougher, tighter financial conditions in most regions, inflation back again for the first time in a long time. Money's no longer cheap for those funding rollouts and for lots of the stakeholders and for lots of the people who we asked for their views in this survey. Has implications on the ad market, so for broadcasters and AVOD players. Cost of living crisis has impact on people selling services, Pay TV and SVOD players. Investor pressure for everybody. I think that's probably fed into a lot of these responses, but we can talk about it. And obviously the media and tech stocks, they all took a beating last year. I think the NASDAQ was down over 30%, and all of our media companies that we'll talk about suffered. Everyone was down. And what with the hangover from COVID and the pressures this means on the streaming model and cost cutting and all these macro conditions help to increase the challenges for the stakeholders. And I think that's reflected in a few places. But we should good to talk about it and good to be on with Jack Thomas as well.
Yes, thanks, Jack. I think yours probably from me. You've summed up the year splendidly there, and not as much more for me to add other than yes, in sort of typical fashion over the last few years, it seems like each year's ready to try and outdo the previous year as far as disruption. But from me as a director of 3Vision, I look after a lot of our syndicated research products like Show Tracker and Movie Tracker. So I imagine a lot of my perspective you'll sort of hear today will be kind of focused on that sort of distribution element for both the shows and movies. But yeah, it's great to be here on Inside Content. Last time I was here was the last trends report.
All right, great. Thanks, guys. So we can kind of just jump right into it and start talking about the trends. The first one we identified was that North America is ranked as the number one market for growth in 2023. Is this at all surprising to either of you guys?
I could take that first. It's never surprising that the US comes out on top for the very simple and probably blatantly obvious metric that it's big and worth a lot of money. And for the people responding, I'm sure we've got to. It's not just. I know we're based in the UK. It's not just UK respondents. It's European and American respondents predominantly. There'll be a few from kind of broader EMEA markets and probably a few from Asia as well. But the US has always been highly valuable. I guess one of the sort of dominant parts of the conversation towards the end of the year was about spend of US media companies, and I think maybe if we look at the results, I've got them in front of me. I mean, it wasn't. I mean, it was sort of categorical that it was in the US was in the sort of top 3 expected markets, but it wasn't everyone's top. And I think that's probably reflecting some of the kind of fear around what's happening with the level of commissions coming out of the US and content spend, and the pressure on these bigger streamers and bigger US media companies are having to save money. And what with Warner Brothers needing to save 3.6 billion, and obviously HBO has been a great partner for UK players. I think that maybe has contained the response for the US, but it doesn't surprise me that it's up there, because it remains a strong opportunity, even though some people are maybe pulling it back a bit at the moment.
It's a shame we don't do this trend every month, because we probably start to see that sort of potential hesitance come into play here if we were sort of doing a sort of continuous read of our network, as we sort of see more and more of those results come out early this year that sort of show that sort of sign of perhaps a bit more considerateness going forward. For me, it's the interesting one is seeing India sort of going so quite as high as it is as well. And we've seen a lot of, studio SVOD activity that as well. Disney took control of Hotstar alongside its sort of Fox takeover, and sort of managed to sort of grow that fairly well with Disney Plus. But there's certain key rights, such as obviously with the cricket, that they're sort of set to lose. That is sort of having a sort of damper on the service in that market. They blamed their loss of Disney Plus subscribers globally almost wholly on the Hotstar element. And we're starting to see some of their sort of competitors in that region start to pick up a lot of steam. Food Select, sort of as part of that kind of Paramount JV in the region, taking that kind of vertical integration sort of strategy. We've seen so many other services do pretty much everything Paramount going on there, and obviously them now getting the cricket rights as well. We're seeing it's one of the biggest markets for Amazon. We're seeing acquiring content, so it's definitely a lot of activity there. And obviously, there's potential high sort of revenue opportunities just for the sheer amount of people, even if you do have to potentially skew the pricing of your services down below sort of what your ideal ARPU would be.
I think India is a perplexing market. It is huge, but I think when you dig into the market a bit deeper, obviously it's probably multiple markets collected together, given the different language markets and different regional markets. But it doesn't surprise me that it remains exciting. I always find it hard, and I think when I talk to the kind of stakeholders, I think they do too, to generalize about markets. I mean, I get the feeling that kind of there's been ups and downs this year, and they feel there might be more ups and downs coming up. Generally kind of stable, some markets, a few issues here and there, but a few positive things around competition, where there's a bit more intense competition that helps people. And India and LATAM have always had a slight split personality. I think it probably comes from the fact that you really don't have much of a free TV opportunity if you're an international content provider in those markets. Kind of you're restricted to the smaller pool of pay and SVOD suppliers, and perhaps some of the emerging AVODs, and even more so becoming a bit more restricted to SVOD. So maybe that limits the opportunity for some. But actually, kind of when I looked at this, and I just look at it again, the thing that kind of strikes me slightly is that kind of our respondents weren't more positive about Australia, which I know from the work we did with PACT and the respondents to the PACT survey, which is the export survey, which is a kind of different one that happens early in the year, and looks at their actual performance in terms of revenues. Australia came out much higher in terms of feeling, but not so much in ours. I can't explain that, but it is interesting that it maybe doesn't feature as strongly.
It's interesting on the again, taking that choker tracker perspective, as we track so many shows sort of going into all these different markets as well. Australia sort of has sat in a status quo for a very long time, being one of our sort of biggest markets with sort of a healthy supply of third-party buyers for US and UK content, and that's finally starting to be sort of challenged a little bit more, with more and more vertical integration taking up sort of the sales, even of the UK side of things, as BBC First sort of has its relatively strong presence there compared to its presence in other markets as well. So we're starting to see that sort of potential sort of shift within Australia. on the distribution side. And so maybe alongside that, we're getting that knock-on effect with the content side as well, as far as sort of things coming out and perhaps spooking people a little bit and not necessarily seeing it as sort of as strong as it might have once been, as we sort of see it sort of cave in a little bit more. And it's nowhere nearer to the level we see someone like Latin America, where we've seen most of the most content going there these days is going straight to a studio SVOD. As far as from the US and UK, as you said, yeah, not much for free TV, but not much for anything that isn't owned by a studio as well, unless you're Globo Play these days.
You guys touched on a lot of the markets in these results, so we can kind of jump into the next trend, which is that Netflix is seen as the streamer with the best growth prospects. What do you think in 2023 is going to really define the year for Netflix and make sure that they, ensure these, growth prospects?
The hopeful thing is always content with these sorts of things, and one would hope Netflix is going to sort of start taking a bit more of a considered approach. We've been tracking all these originals for some time, and Netflix, more than anyone else, sort of ballooned in terms of volume, and this was just scripted content. But perhaps I think what they might need, what might be useful for their both their budgets and sort of the service identity, is take that sort of slightly more considered approach. So less originals this year than previous originals, but of a higher value, of a higher budget, of more likely to ones that are more likely to be renewed. There's a lot of Netflix subscribers have sort of had frustration over the years as some of their favorite cult hits don't get renewed because they don't quite get as enough views. But with so much stuff coming out constantly, it's quite difficult for you to sort of continuously get those breakout hits, as you inevitably sort of bury some of those sort of potential massive hits like a Queen's Gambit or even House of Cards going well back, like well under sort of a lot of kind of deluge or sort of general content. And with that as well, it means you can start to sort of pivot your content strategy to be a bit more tailored to like fight back against sort of the growth of people like Disney Plus and obviously Amazon as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you noted Disney Plus, because it was ranked number 1 last year, and Jack Davis and I were kind of talking about this. It dropped down to number 4 this year. We noted in the report that it might be due to financial constraints. Jack Davis, would you mind elaborating?
Yeah, it's very interesting about kind of what the prospects that they were ranked quite low this year, and that kind of Netflix remained high. I think to start with, I'd say that it doesn't surprise me that Netflix are number 1. They remain kind of, I think, the poster child for SVOD. They're kind of 230 odd million now. I know they had an awful year. Kind of they started off the year with sort of negative growth. Their share price got hammered, but they ended up the year with revenue growth and subs growth, not that much, granted, but ahead of targets in fourth quarter. And I think, as Jack says, the kind of people felt, this is hard to kind of actually analytically kind of qualify, but they felt their content may have slightly lost their way. But despite that, actually, if you look at the kind of Nielsen viewing numbers in the States, they were kind of 13 of the top 15 original SVOD programs in the year. And in terms of acquired, I think they had the vast majority. So despite all of these things, they're doing really well. They're number 1 you go across all the markets. We were looking at our markets, the kind of UK, France, Germany, Italy, and they go across all of those. They're generating the most SVOD viewing. So they're winning those markets. So I think Disney came in strong. They came in with a great content set. They got a lot of growth. They did really well. But now, as Jack mentioned, a kind of key one, the Indian market is causing consternation, because we have to remember that's it's near enough a third of their subs. It's I think it was over 60 million. I think it went down in Q4, and they've got challenges there because they've lost the cricket, and the IPL cricket so big in India. But the 2 other regions I think were up a little bit in Q4, and they remain pretty single-minded about growth, and they have kind of significant content pipelines, and they have kind of significant kind of movie pipelines as well. So it surprised me that they bumped down so much. But as Jack said, kind of their content investments dropped. I think they pulled back on was it $100 million worth of the EMEA kind of content original budgets and some other things as well. So that's probably reflecting concern, especially some of our stakeholders are probably there looking kind of opportunities with Disney Plus, looking to maybe find co-pros in local markets, looking maybe to find some acquisitions. We've seen them buy third-party content, a very small amount, but we've seen them do it. And maybe that's kind of reflected in these concerns.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of on the topic of, productions and streamers, the next finding is that 74% of our respondents agreed that streamers are an attractive partner for local co-productions. Jack T, you're a guru of our show tracker and movie tracker services. Can you kind of talk a little bit about this finding and maybe some trends that seem to support this sentiment?
I mean, the interesting thing is it's clearly very attractive to a lot of people to get involved with this. If you're a local service right now trying to find premium drama award-winning content, it's very difficult because a lot of that content, when we tend to do analysis of things like the Emmys, and you'll see it pretty much everything that's sort of in running for outstanding drama, outstanding comedy is either destined for, it's a Netflix original, so me as a local UK broadcaster is not going to be able to pick that up. It's an Amazon original, same issue. It's a Hulu title that's distributed by Disney, so destined for Disney Plus in my market, so I'm probably not going to pick that up. Or it's, if it's none of those things, sometimes the only option left over is, it's a volume deal. It's an HBO title, so it's going to Sky Atlantic. So it's quite difficult to sort of find those really high-end, high-budget productions to even acquire, and obviously much harder for a lot of local services to finance. So it makes a lot of sense for that sort of sentiment to be there and a lot of people to be really interested in that. What we see in the data, however, in Show Tracker is perhaps a slight dip in this kind of activities, particularly with UK, US co-productions. We've seen some really interesting case studies that are quite recent, something like The Tourist, with lots of different commissioners sort of coming in to help support that around the world in 80 days. Again, that was sort of a lot of sort of the European broadcasters getting on board to sort of help get that off the ground as well. We see, a few of these really interesting case studies, but as a sort of overall whole, they have been sort of going down. I don't necessarily think that means that, that's it for them. It can quite easily sort of go back up again. It seems very dependent on, especially on the US side, their particular strategy for that year. AMC were very big on sort of a lot of these co-productions as they launched AMC Plus in the US, and kind of sort of built up a kind of reputation almost for AMC Plus. A lot of their AMC Plus originals have that kind of sort of premium UK style about them, because just built by the fact that so many of them are UK co-productions. So they somewhat have got themselves into a corner where they might need to sort of keep that activity up if that does become the identity of AMC Plus for its subscribers and the expectation. But it's something that we will probably see sort of dip up and down over the years, and obviously going into this year it'll be one that's particularly interesting to watch, as a lot of these studios, as Jack was saying, sort of start to potentially take a little bit more control of their content budgets. What does that translate out as in terms of action? Does that mean potentially more co-productions because you can do it with less investment, you can do it with reliable people, or less co-productions because you'd rather do more things in-house with the studios and everything that and are sort of trustworthy, hopefully produce trustworthy hits?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really fascinating space this year, because ultimately the streamers still want to do co-productions. They still want to get hold of original content. They want to do productions. They now rather than be able to say, here's my big fat checkbook, I'm going to do a show with you, I want all the rights and so on. Now they're having to control their costs a bit more. We understand there's sort of signs of a bit more flexibility coming. So maybe they don't need all markets. Maybe they don't take as many rights. So that might make the project a little bit more appetizing or attractive to partners as well. So I think, let's see what happens this year.
Yeah, definitely. And I think besides local content, lower priced ad tiers is another top rated SVOD priority. Do you guys think that Netflix's success of the ad tiers will kind of influence how the rest follow? I mean, it's a little too early still to tell how their implementation of this will work, but do you think this will be kind of a defining thing?
I think obviously there's two main metrics to measure with that. Is obviously how many people can they get onto that low price tier. So all these potential subscribers that they might bleed or have bled. How many can they keep on with that? But the other thing is obviously how much money they can potentially make from the ad tier themselves. They are sitting on a, by most accounts, a sort of fantastic recommendation engine that takes in a lot of different factors to sort of service your content from from what sort of demographic you are to what time of day you're coming onto Netflix, and all sorts of other things at play, changing the thumbnails and lots of these lovely clever things to build a recommendation engine. If you turn that power into something to load up very bespoke adverts for people, that could be a game changer in the world of advertising. At the moment we see a little bit of that sort of stuff happen as you're sort of browsing around, unless you have an ad blocker, and sort of Facebook sort of takes a lot of what things that you like and follow and interact with on Facebook and feed that to advertisers. They'll follow you around, but obviously certain things sort of put a lot of damper on that. Facebook's share price tumbled when Apple put up a lot of things to stop that kind of activity happening on their devices. If Netflix is able to really sort of create a or at least facilitate a really good advertising system for people coming in, that could be the sort of big game changer for them, where it's not only hopefully stopping that bleed of subscribers, but becoming a significant revenue stream that might hopefully outpace the sort of loss of subscription revenue that they would have got for each person who chooses ad tier over subscriber tier.
Yeah, you said it, Peyton. It's too early to talk about some of these things because we don't really know what impacts it's having on Netflix subscriber split, how it's all working. There has been some really kind of bits of data thrown out. People like Antenna and Ampere have thrown things out. All of those have pointed to kind of a relatively small percent of the people signing up to the US kind of ad tier. I think it was sort of 8, 9, 10% were on the ad tier. The rest were on non-ad tiers. And when they looked at those, I think when Antenna looked at those, or one of the others, that around kind of 30% were new sign-ups, about 50% were former subscribers, churn subscribers, and the rest were downgrades. And if it continues on that arc, then it's kind of doing its job. It's bringing in more price-sensitive subs, and it's saving people who've churned probably due to price sensitivity and affordability. But we'll see what happens. But what I think is really interesting, that struck me as probably the more significant thing, is that if you go and look to sign up to Netflix in certainly in the US, the UK, and in fact, quite a few markets, all the markets I looked at, and you look at the 3 tiers they have on offer, the 3 tiers they offer to consumers are at the top, the premium for $19.99 in the US. The standard is $15.49 in the US, and then the lowest price tier that they put in front of consumers is basic with ads, is the $6.99 tier, and they skip out and they don't show the $9.99 tier. There is a small thing underneath thing, see all plans, and you can see the $9.99 plan. But in the UK and the US and other markets, they are putting front and center the ad tier plan, and that kind of implies certainly that the kind of net ARPU of an ad tier customer is higher than the non-ad tier customers. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing that. Obviously, it's early days and they're trying to drive it, but it's going to be great to see kind of how it works. And yes, in your kind of opening question, you can bet that kind of everyone else is going to be watching this really carefully.
Yeah, definitely. All right, moving on to an always hot topic, FAST and AVOD. This year, specialist AVOD services are ranked number 1 AVOD opportunity. I believe this was against BVOD services and FAST channels. There seems to be a drop in faith of BVOD services compared against these other 2 categories. Do you guys think that this is a product of the growth of FAST in general, or why do you think there's less confidence in the BVOD services this year specifically?
Irrational overexcitement, probably. No, I obviously there's so many interesting developments in AVOD and FAST last year, and in fact over the last few years. The timeline of AVOD and FAST is a really interesting one to follow, kind of historically. To be frank, if you talk to people content licensing about AVOD in 2007, 2008, 2009, be like, well, that's the piracy stuff, isn't it? Or that's stuff we don't really want to get involved in that. We're not going to license to it. Over the years, we've been through kind of legitimization of things like YouTube and Google, kind of launch of catch-up services, kind of the early kind of launches in Asia and Central and Eastern Europe of all the AVOD services there, where kind of they were very late to adopt SVOD, so they went AVOD first. And then it wasn't really until kind of, well, it was about 10 years ago, 2013, I think, Pluto launched. Then we started to see kind of Tubi, a few other initiatives. It's changed. I mean, but whilst it's changed, I think the most important point I always like to make is that if you look at the pie of AVOD, okay, within that, you've got YouTube, you've got Facebook, both of whom take a huge amount of those revenues. Okay, it's a different sort of revenue, but they still take it. Then you've got the specialists, so the Rokus, the Plutos. Then you've got the specialists that are kind of the OEMs, the C manufacturers like the Samsungs and the Vizios and the LGs. And then you've got the broadcasters and the broadcast services. The imbalance that we've got now is everyone is really interested in the space because the revenues in America have been growing very fast. I think kind of estimates are it's about 80% of global revenues. And they're looking at global markets, seeing it's going to grow. But the shape of the markets is very different. The BVOD players in other markets have got much more power. If you talk to the people in the content licensing market, that's definitely true. Kind of they view fast as a linear right. Kind of if they're taking their windows, they're protecting themselves against any other kind of fast players. If anyone's doing it, they'll be doing it with their own fast channels or their own digital players. And so I'm actually quite surprised. Well, I think I'm not surprised really with the response. I think the response reflects that there are these new incremental opportunities coming from these specialist AVOD players, from people selling content, and also to some extent people co-producing and creating projects, because we are seeing some of that activity in the US. So this is this great new incremental opportunity. But outside of the US, I'm kind of the stronger opportunity in terms of volume really would be the BVOD players. And we see a lot through kind of, I know what Jack does with Show Tracker, we see a lot of kind of all of that adjacent releasing with broadcasters as more and more of it has moved to be a pure AVOD release. So in the UK on All 4, and Canada on CBC Gem, and France on kind of the Mighty F1s, and in Germany on RTL and Join and so on. And with that, they also even have SVOD initiatives. But so it's a bit of a it's not a simple kind of way to answer it and look at it. There are these great opportunities with the C manufacturers and with the kind of the specialist AVOD players. Including fast, but I think outside of the US, kind of I wouldn't underestimate BVOD.
Yeah, I think if you had a look at this sort of if we focused our target audience of the report on somewhere like EMEA, we probably would see BVOD be much higher, because we see a huge amount of that activity there. With Show Tracker, we're looking at where all the sort of brand new scripted series are going across our global markets. And as far as like first window sales, if we're talking about things in a sort of free video on demand space and a sort of AVOD BVOD space, it's more likely to be BVOD than AVOD. A lot of the first window activity from these sort of AVOD specialists is largely just sort of limited to the originals that they're putting out, which are not insignificant in themselves. As far as those sort of brand new first window licensings we see, and it's the BVOD services that are really sort of driving a lot of that activity there. And for a lot of these broadcasters, it is kind of have your cake and eat it too. If they're not licensing something directly to their BVOD service as a digital only release, and it's got a linear release, more and more we're seeing, particularly in places like the UK, every episode of that linear sort of acquisition will go up on the BVOD service at the time of its first episode release. So they're happy to prioritize the kind of digital side of their business at the potential expense of the linear transmission getting less ratings, as people elect to just binge it on the catch-up service instead.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think we have time for a couple more questions. One of the other findings we had here was about scripted TV series, and this being the very dominant vote for the best content for subscriber acquisition. Why do we think this is? What is it about scripted series specifically that folks see so much potential in?
Yeah, I guess maybe all the services are looking for their the next box set binge, aren't they? They want to offer that box set that hooks people in with an arc of viewing that enables them to stay. I mean, there is such a currency in TV series. I'm not. Yeah, maybe it'd be interesting to look at kind of how they compare kind of movies and things with it. But there is such a, I guess, kind of cultural kind of strength in kind of demand for kind of that new box set, that new TV series that everyone's going to be talking about. I don't know whether it's as simple as that.
Yeah, I think if you sort of look at some sort of other people out there who sort of perhaps monitoring things like Twitter and the buzz around things a lot more, you probably see there is that sort of more consistent chatter about scripted TV series compared to other things, because obviously it's something that can go on over several weeks and there's a drama going on and there's lots of theories and all that sort of thing going around. It's also something that obviously can reach out to global markets quite easily. We saw unscripted be quite low. That's more likely to be a perhaps more market specific thing, even if it is, ultimately derived from a format, and that exists globally. Obviously, those particular versions of the shows are usually particular to their markets. But I think that was also reflective in the sort of change of pattern of releasing with these things. We saw Netflix, and it continues to sort of pioneer we're going to release the entire season at once as a box set, and all these studio SVODs kind of turning their nose up at that strategy for the most part and releasing weekly. Something that made sense, a lot more sense when they were first launching, when Disney Plus launched with a trial, if they put every episode of The Mandalorian, the marquee title that they released alongside the service, up, then people could get a trial, watch the whole series, and then unsubscribe again. And that same thing's true even without a free trial. A 10 episode run ensures that you're at least getting 2 months out of people. But these services have enough new content coming out now that can't necessarily be the sort of full strategy driving those decisions anymore. And some of it might be that you can examine the kind of overall sort of impact these sorts of things have on things like Twitter, which obviously in itself will eventually sort of hopefully convert to more viewers or more subscribers, and see that it's better to sort of have lots of little splashes once per week as opposed to one big splash for one big box set release.
Yeah, and onto the topic of cord cutting. This was a pretty split question that we asked. Our respondents were very, 50-50 on this, about how quickly cord cutting will accelerate this year. So what do you think, Jack D, about why executives are so split here?
I think we should cross tab where they're from, and look at who they are, because there's a lot of kind of territorial disparity over the kind of progression, the progression today and the future prospects for pay TV. Obviously, kind of there's big challenges everywhere. Lots of challenges in the kind of the more developed markets to hold on to revenues as people are kind of spinning down and maybe taking skinnier packs with OTT or maybe churning. But there's lots of markets where pay TV isn't as expensive and it's more of a utility, so the likelihood of kind of churn there is lower. But so yeah, I think it's probably a lot to do with where they're from. Pay TV is actually kind of 2 years ago, maybe a bit longer, I would have been a bit more cynical about their rate of innovation and rate of change. Obviously, there were some really doing it, but there were lots who have really, I think, felt sitting on their hands. But that is changing. They have all kind of evolved their proposition, both in terms of what the consumer proposition, in terms of how affordable it is and what pricing there is, and then also in terms of aggregating and bringing on board the OTT SVODs and these other suppliers that consumers wanted that they may have been resisting or being slow to integrate. So there is still pressure and there will still be losses, but I think it will vary a lot by market.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess to kind of wrap this up, if you guys think, one trend that might define 2023, we've kind of covered a lot of ground here about FAST, about streamers, co-productions, local content, all of this sort of thing. If you kind of had to, nail it down on one trend you think might define the year, what do you think that, our respondents should kind of look out for? Jack T, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a sort of combination in terms of both subscription growth and cord cutting. That's the sort of interesting one where we've seen a lot of these sort of big SVOD services start to bleed subscribers here and there. So whether they're sort of new initiatives, whether that's ad tiers, new approach to content, sort of helps keep those subscribers in turn, and then obviously in effect how that might as well affect cord cutting. We're seeing a lot of people. I think one big hope for Pay TV is that they can become that super aggregator, as there's just too many services for people to subscribe to, and so it's a case of will how much the sort of SVODs may, especially the studio SVODs who may have cut ties with their sort of previous sort of Pay TV partners in various markets, might sort of go back and sort of re-establish those partnerships to help support their services. So that potential turn, I think a lot of people, especially sort of people who maybe of an older generation than me, have been hoping for that Pay TV could sort of have its comeback, and we kind of almost reset back to the days of package deals, except now it's just the SVOD instead of channels. This might be the year we start to see a little bit more of that happen. But obviously, like those big sort of Pay TV package deals, which often were priced much higher than we're sort of seeing the price of content now for consumers. It'd be interesting. We have not touched on this subject in this report, but obviously it'd be interesting to see if people sort of go that one step further of cord cutting and see a sort of growth in pirate activity as well, as that's obviously something that's always there lurking in the shadows in this industry that sort of seeks to sort of cut everyone out of the loop.
Yeah. And Jack D, any final thoughts?
There's a lot of things you could jump on for trailers last year. I think I'll go for a boring one. I think kind of cost or financial realism, I think was the theme. I think I felt kind of hit. I mean, not everywhere, but it never ceases to amaze me. I have been in industry just for long enough, I have to admit, but you see the waves and you see the cycles, and the fact that kind of Q1, just the end of Q1 this year, suddenly Wall Street decided that they weren't going to fund the kind of subscribers at any cost model, because they didn't think it was the right thing to do. So everyone knew that it was going to get tougher for SVODs. Everyone knew competition was going to get harder. The markets were going to be more saturated. There were so many people involved. But the sudden abrupt change, and then this kind of subsequent kind of realism in kind of controlling the content costs, to me kind of was kind of quite a strong theme from people we spoke to. But that's probably a bit negative and a bit boring.
That's all right. It's realistic. Great. Thanks both. I'm sure our listeners will get some really good insight from this. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Inside Content. Make sure to drop us a rating on your listening platform and follow us to make sure you never miss an episode. And again, if you want to access the report, you can download it. The link is in this description, or you can access it from our website. Thank you guys again. I hope you guys have a good night.
Great. Nice to be on it. Take care.
Thanks, Peyton.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Inside Content, the TV industry podcast brought to you by 3Vision. With decades of TV industry experience and real-world success, we know the ins and outs of the market like nobody else. To learn more about our TV consultancy services, head to 3vision.tv.